So welcome to week 3 of the master course, Master the Mental Game. And I'm glad you could be with me tonight. I think we're gonna cover a few topics that maybe you haven't thought about in the way I'm gonna tell you. Of course, my goal is to help you become a better mental coach. So I picked a few topics that I thought would hit home in that regard, especially for golf. Let me just make sure we're recording. Yes, we are. Okay. And I gotta leave this here in case people show up. There's Brett. Okay. So let's get started. And tonight we're going to talk about motivation and practice. I think they're related. And the first thing I want to talk about is motivation, and it's the fire inside. You know, as a coach or a teacher, if your student has that fire inside, that desire, your job gets easy. The question is, how do we help promote that? I know motivation is from within. And it's really up to your student to be motivated. But I think there are certain strategies that you can implement to facilitate that process. So those are the ones we're going to talk about. But first, I want to talk about this principle of extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is praise, rewards, trophies. Intrinsic motivation is the fire inside, desire, need. We all want our students to have intrinsic motivation, but a lot of times we try to promote that intrinsic motivation with extrinsic motivation, with praise and rewards. And the problem that researchers have discovered, and I don't know if you remember this from Psych 101, but the rewards and the praise can actually diminish the intrinsic motivation or the fire inside of your students. It's called the overjustification hypothesis. And just quickly, I want to talk to you about the research, but what they discovered back in the 70s is, they had this toy called Robbie the Robot. You can see him right there. And he had these arms and lights going off, and the kids loved to play with them. So they put a group of kids in a room with Robbie the Robot, and they measured how much time they would play with Robbie the Robot plus other toys. And when those kids came out, they said, here, you did a great job playing with Robbie the Robot. Here's a bag of M&Ms, whatever, give them a reward. Another group of kids measured time playing with Robbie the Robot. When they came out, they just said, come back tomorrow. What they discovered is the kids that did not get the reward for playing with Robbie the Robot played less time with Robbie the Robot the second time. And so people are like, what could be happening? They called this the overjustification hypothesis. And the psychologists, you got to give them a little leniency here, but they said the kids would justify why they were playing with Robbie the Robot. They were thinking, was it because I like to, or because it was the reward? And because maybe I got the reward, I didn't like to play with Robbie the Robot as much. And so they said, extrinsic motivation or rewards can diminish our flame. And there was a lot of research on that, and I don't want to go too much into that. But what I do want to emphasize is you need both. You need extrinsic motivation and you need intrinsic motivation. So you need praise, rewards, and what your students, what your clients like to hear. But you also need to promote the intrinsic motivation. And I think the extrinsic motivation tactics are easy, praise and rewards, that's easy. But how do we promote the fire inside, the intrinsic motivation? And that's what I want to focus on tonight, because I think a lot of coaches, teachers, they lack this in their, let's say, toolbox. And there's basically 4 components to develop intrinsic motivation: strengths, self-improvement or mastery, giving control, or giving up control and focusing on meaning and purpose. And I think when you create an environment that has those four main factors plus extrinsic motivation, that's when you have an environment with the highest level of, let's say, strategies to facilitate motivation in your athletes, in your golfer, in your students. So let's talk about the first one, because I think the first one is way overlooked. So I want to talk a little bit about positive psychology. I think some of you have heard about positive psychology, but I want to just talk a little bit about this. So in 1999, Martin Seligman, who is probably the most famous psychologist in the world today, he's at the University of Pennsylvania. You might know him about, he studied learned helplessness with the dogs and stuff. Well, he became the American Psychological Association president in 1999. He said, look, we got to stop focusing on anxiety and negativity and all that. Let's focus on the positive. And he created a whole movement called positive psychology. And it's taken root. You can get a master's in it. And one of the main principles of positive psychology is if you focus on your strengths, if you have your students focus on their strengths, they're going to be more successful and happier. Okay. That's a big component of positive psychology coaching. So before I talk about this, you can see that website. So AuthenticHappiness.org. If you put that website in, and I'll, when I send you an email, I'll put that website in too, but you go to the University of Pennsylvania site. It's the positive psychology site. You can look up articles, videos. You're probably familiar with Grit, the book Grit. Well, that's actually Angela Duckworth. She was a student of Martin Seligman, and now she's at University of Pennsylvania as well. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. So I just wanted to kind of share with you that that's a really cool website with a lot of cool free stuff. I use it in my classes all the time. So let me talk about how we could use this, and I'll give you an example for me. So I'm very creative. I've written books. Later in life, I discovered I was creative. And it was a strength of mine. So when I'm on the golf course, I try to enhance that creativity. It's obvious about visualization and stuff, but one thing I discovered, and this sounds a little strange, but I think you'll get it. When I'm putting, I try to feel like I'm in tune with the green. Like the green is like playing a song. So if it's fast, my rhythm is slower. And if the green is slow, my rhythm's a little faster because you got to have more of a pop. And so I kind of say to myself, what is the tune of this green? And I try to match my rhythm to fit the tune. Now think about that. It's being creative. It's like tapping into my creativity, and it's allowing me to focus more on the process. And I'm enjoying it, right? And so the idea is, if you can tap into your students' strengths, it might be creativity, it might be some other things, and kind of harness that while they're playing, it will give them confidence. It'll get them more in the moment, because they're totally in tune with their strengths. So again, it depends on your students and what strengths they have, but it's your goal as a coach to figure out what strengths they have and try to incorporate that into their mental package. So for me, being real creative helps me. It helps me get in the moment, free my right brain, and I like it. And so, but some students might not be creative; they might be analytical. So again, you just got to figure out their strengths and work that into your mental game package with them. Another one is a self-improvement or mastery or growth mindset, which we'll talk about. When people are focusing on mastery, that brings the fire inside. Think about this. I bet most of you played a sport in high school. And I know it happened to me. I played tennis and I got only so good. And then I plateaued. And what happened after I plateaued? I didn't really care about playing anymore. But if you keep on getting better and better, it keeps the fire inside, right? So we want to focus on mastery with our students. So let me talk about that in first, you probably have heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You got the basic needs, so safety needs, psychological needs. Well, self-actualization is really self-mastery. And he's basically saying it's a really important need. It's something we need to do. And because we need to have this mastery, it creates this fire inside. And I just have this quote of Michael Jordan. Actually, there's a video of him I show in my class, but he always says, you know, Michael Jordan, you would think I wouldn't challenge myself every game, but that's all I try to do is I challenge myself to get better in practice and competition. He knew if he worked on self-mastery, it would motivate him, even though he won 6 NBA championship titles. And, you know, he was already after probably 3, he probably didn't really have that motivation anymore to win, but self-mastery created that, kept that fire inside. So I want to talk about, I know probably most of you've heard about this term growth mindset, right? So Carol Dweck wrote this book called Growth Mindset. It's a good book, and I would recommend it. I'm a fan. Okay, I saw her. I remember reading about her when I was an undergrad in the '80s, and she was a famous psychologist back in the '80s. And I saw her speak maybe in '95 or something at a conference. So I've been following her career. So when this book came out, you know, I knew a lot about what she was talking about, but I think she's wrong in a certain way. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But let me first tell you about the theory that she has. And I think probably most of you heard about this. So you have a growth mindset, which is, you know, a mastery mindset. You know, as you're getting better, the kids that focus on growth, they're more motivated, they're more confident, they don't drop out of math, whatever, and they focus on effort. Then there's these other kids that have a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is, you know, you either have it or you don't, like a math ability. If you don't have it, then those are the kind of kids that drop out. And I'm keeping it simple here. So of course, everybody says, promote a growth mindset, promote a growth mindset. Well, of course, it's simple. Don't do a fixed mindset. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, that doesn't make sense to me. Of course, you're going to do a growth mindset. It's not this or that. And what I'm getting at is I think she's half correct. You know, she said, focus on a growth mindset. That's real important for the fire inside. But I think she's missing the boat on this important concept. And it's this. And it's because I did my dissertation on this. And it's called the achievement goal theory. And basically what the achievement goal theory says is some people focus on a growth mindset or a mastery mindset. And if they are improving, that means they're successful. Therefore, they're motivated. And then there's other people that have a competitive mindset. And if they're one of the best on their team, one of the best in the league, one of the on the starting lineup, best in the world, then they basically are successful and they're motivated, right? So back in the 90s, when I was doing my dissertation, the research said, well, a mastery mindset, or you could call it a growth mindset, was better than a competitive mindset. Because you could control mastery. You can't really control if you're the best in the world or best on the team. And so there was a lot of research saying, you know, let's focus on mastery, you know, kind of like the growth mindset. And I came out and I said, no, that's not right. Look at some of these great athletes. Look at Nick Faldo. You probably know the story about Nick Faldo. Well, in the late 80s, he was one of the best in the world, but he couldn't win majors. They called him Nick Foldo, right? The British press ripped him because he would always choke in majors. So he went to David Ledbetter and they fixed his swing. And he was really handsy and you couldn't time your hands under pressure. And so they made him more of a body turn, you know, more of the big muscles that could handle pressure. We talked about that last time. And his ranking went down, but basically at the end of the 80s, he won, you know, a Masters in 80, I think it was 89. And I was there, which was cool. And then 90, he won 3 Masters and 3 British Opens. He's won 6 majors. But what I'm getting at is he had a mastery mindset and he had a competitive mindset, both. Same thing with Tiger Woods. 97, he wins the Masters by 12 strokes. He goes to his instructor, Butch Harmon. He says, I got to fix my swing. You know, it was too shut at the top. I got to hit more high floating fades to win more majors. So he focused on a mastery mindset, which helped him win tournaments. He had both. He had a competitive mindset and a mastery mindset. To me, they feed off each other. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, a growth mindset is very important. A mastery mindset is very important, but you also want to promote in your athletes a competitive mindset. They got to focus on, they got to play in tournaments, which is kind of the laboratory to figure out what they're doing right or wrong. They got to try to be one of the best on the team, or, just play tournaments and try to get better in tournaments. And the idea, they feed off each other. So to me, if you just have a growth mindset, you're not going to try to keep on getting better if you don't always, or I should say, also have a competitive mindset. They kind of go back and forth. And if you have a student that only has a competitive mindset or competitive goal orientation, and all they focus on is being one of the best on their team, they don't care about improving, you got to balance that out as well. So there's got to be a balance between mastery and competitive. And that's what I mean by when Carol Dweck gets it half right. Yeah, you got to have a mastery or growth mindset, but you also need a competitive mindset. And those balance each other. And then they keep on helping you to raise your game, or help your students to keep on getting better. And you can see both Nick Faldo and Tiger Woods had both a mastery and competitive mindset. And that's why they have achieved immense in their sports. And let me talk about one more thing, and then I'll take a break for questions. So I'm going to give you my goal setting plan that I work with students, athletes on. And let me just explain it first, but I'll send it to you with the email, which you'll get tomorrow with the recording. So it's easy to do, everybody's heard about goals. Goals work, okay? But what I want to share with you is, because this is, the mental game master course, we're not talking about performance. We're talking about how can we help in their mental game. Well, you can do goal setting with the mental game, just like you can with the physical game, like, greens hit or fairways hit. So let's just say you have a student has a difficult time with their concentration, their focus. Well, the first thing you want to do is you create a grid, 10 all the way to 100, and you kind of let them describe, every 20, whatever it feels like for them. Like 50 feels focusing, but kind of distracted. 100 feels great focus. 0 or 10 feels not focused at all. And then what I have athletes do, if it's focused, but usually it could be confidence. What I'm getting at is you can take any psychological dimension and create a grid, right? It could be attitude, good attitude, and then 0 is a terrible attitude. And then what you want to do, this is real important, let them rank. And maybe you could do, a few rounds, holes 1 to 6, 7 to 12, 13, 18, because you're going to see differences. Maybe they focus really well from holes 1 to 6, 7 to 12, not very well at all, and real good 13, 18. So they're taking a dip. If you just had them rank across the board for a round, you wouldn't find that difference. So that's why I think it's real important to do like every 6 holes. You can do that for confidence. You can do that with attitude, whatever, but I think if you break it into 3 sections, you get a lot of really good information. Okay. So now this is what I'm going to give you, this like grid. But basically, let's say your long-term goal is to improve focus for Sally. And that's what you're working on this month. I usually have let's say 2 short-term goals. And so we discover from holes 1 to 6, this Sally's really good. She's like at an 80. So we don't have to work on that. But holes 7 to 12, she takes a dip to a 50. You can see one goes from 50 to 70. So we want to, we don't want to say go from 50 to 90. We want to keep it what we call realistic. And then same thing, holes 13, 18, she's struggling too. So she's really taking a dip. And so we have a plan. So the plan is, we talk about having a pre-shower routine. We could talk about having a post-shower routine. Maybe she takes a big dip later because she needs nutrition, like to eat a banana, whatever it is. But you got to figure out, sometimes you got to mix and match, figure out the strategies. And then the following week, you see if your strategy is working. And if they're working, you stick with it. If they're not, if she's not getting better in concentration, or if it's attitude, or if it's focus, confidence, you change your strategy. So sometimes strategies work. You're like, oh, this would work, pre-shot routine, post-shot routine, but maybe they didn't work. So that's why it's real important to kind of assess. And if it's working, just, keep going with it. And then the idea is, once you have this plan in place, they're interested. They want to get better, and they're motivated to get better. So it's real good to have a plan. When I work with, let's say, golf teams, we create this plan for everybody. So I create an individualized goal setting plan for everybody, and it's always related to some mental component, and it works great. And one last thing related to this is this principle, and that is, you have these goals, you have a strategy. If it's working, you stick with it. If no, you change. And to me, that's a real effective goal setting plan. And again, I'll send you this template so you can kind of see how it works. But I'm gonna pause right here for a minute, just to see if you have any questions about whatever what we've talked about, or maybe some other things we've talked about.
Hi, Greg. Yeah, I have one for you.
No? Okay. Well, we'll come back. Maybe I'm so on fire. You don't want to ask a question. Okay. So the third component is control. And I remember I talked about Martin Seligman with learned helplessness and the dogs, and it was a terrible, I can't believe they let him do this, but they shocked the dogs, and the dogs that couldn't, let's say, were stuck, just lie down and took it. And he said they would learn helpless. And it's terrible that he could shock dogs, but they wouldn't do that now. But basically, out of that came this theory of depression. And basically what Martin Seligman said was, if you feel like you have no control over your environment, you're more likely to get depressed. So extending that a little farther, one of my favorite studies is they did a nursing home study, and they one group of older adults, they were allowed to pick when they could eat, when they could walk in the quad, when they could water their plants. Another group were told when they could walk in the quad, when they could eat, and when they could water their plants. They died earlier than the group that had control. Think about that. The group that had control lived longer. So control is like a huge need. So it's that burning, it creates that burning desire. It's that internal flame. So what I'm getting at is that how can you add this? Well, think about, you could remember I said, if I wave my magic wand, what would you want to work on? And they would tell me. So they get to choose what they want to work on. So I think that's real important. And then why do you want to work on that? But the idea is you give them control, a lot of control over their decisions, and usually you're going to move in the same direction. Coaches don't typically like to give up control, but the goal is, if you give up control, you gain control. There's a book called Confessions of a Hardwood Warrior by Phil Jackson. It's a great book, Confessions of a Hardwood Warrior by Phil Jackson, the great basketball coach. And he talks a lot about giving up control, and that allowed the Chicago Bulls to win because they felt empowered, because he gave them control. So let me just, there's a question here. Someone had a question, they were speaking. I don't know what that question is, but if you could write another question or clarify what you're asking, but we'll just move on. And then there's the power of why. To me, when you have purpose and meaning in what you do, you're motivated. And I call it know your why. So, when you're working with players, you want to focus on the why. Why do you think we're working on the mental game? Why are we working on confidence? Why are we working on concentration? Why do you want to work on it? Why do you want to work on your short game? Why do you play golf? Why do you practice? But the idea is knowing their why creates meaning and purpose in what they do. And the idea is, instead of just telling them what to do, give up control, but let them understand why they're doing it. And the why promotes this purpose-driven mentality. And so it really relates to the questions you ask them. And it deals with, why do you think we're doing this? Or why do you want to do this? Or are you playing competitive golf? And why are we practicing? So the idea is it creates this purpose-driven mentality, which is real important. So let me move on. For some reason, maybe the chat box isn't working. I don't know, because that's okay. So let me talk about practice. So I went to Florida State to get my master's, where I got my master's, and Erickson came right after. So I never took the class with him. I would have loved taking a class with him. But he's done a lot of research on experts, what makes an expert. And that's his like forte, and he's like the most well-known person. And it's been in a lot of books now, it's kind of trickled down to self-help books. And he talks about, it takes either 10 years or 10,000 hours to become an expert, and that there's a lot of debate there. But I think he's close, especially with the hours, maybe not the years, but the hours. But the one thing I want to focus on in his theory is that it takes deliberate practice. So it's not just practicing, it's deliberate practice, effortful practice, practicing because you know your why, practicing you're purposeful practicing, you're doing something deliberate with a specific reason behind it. That's deliberate practice. Okay, so what's your ultimate goal in practicing? It's transfer of learning from the range to the golf course, or from the range or the golf course with your buddies to competition. It's transfer. And so I want to talk about transfer. Transfer is the ultimate goal for practice. That's why we practice. I like to practice a lot because it's like a meditation. But it's really why we put in the hard work so we can enjoy the competition, or playing with our buddies. And let me just tell you, I've been teaching motor learning for 25 years. So I teach sports psychology and I teach motor learning. So a lot of these concepts come from my class on motor learning. So we have a whole section on practice. And so I want to describe just a few things I think will hit home here with practicing. The first one is this thing called blocked versus random practice. So blocked would be you're doing, you're practicing your short game, and you drop 20 balls and you hit 20 balls from 30 yards, and then you hit 20 balls from 50 yards. That's called blocked practice. Random practice would be you hit a ball at 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, you mix it up, or 10 yards, 40 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, you're mixing it up. Well, what's like real life? Random, of course. So random has a better transfer, but most people don't like to practice that way. But let me tell you what I do. So remember I told you I have this Mental Game Academy and people come in, I use the ATM system. Well, another thing I do is I always go over this, let's say, practice system with them. And basically what I do is I drop balls from 10 yards all the way to, let's say, 70 yards. And I say, take out your 56 wedge, or whatever wedge they like to use in that range. And I say, okay, we're going to hit from 10 yards all the way to 70. And you have to create a system for every 10 yards or even 5 yards. But you could do 10 yards. And the idea is that, you can do it by, you take it halfway back, you set your wrists halfway, full way, half speed, 3/4 speed. It doesn't matter. You can, mix and match the variables. But the secret is that you have a system, and you could verbalize the system to me. So if I say, okay, we're at 50 yards, what's your system? And that player would say, I take it back 3/4 and backswing and 3/4 pace. Okay, what do you do at 35 yards? I take it halfway back, half pace, but I set my wrists. What do you do at 15 yards? I don't set my wrists. I take it halfway back, half pace. It really doesn't matter as long as they have a system. This is why you need a system. I know Tom Kite used to really talk about this in the 80s, because when you're under pressure, if you have a system, you just go to your systems. Oh, on 50 yards, you're in a tournament, you got to hit it over a bunker. You're just going to hit your 50-yard shot. And you're not thinking feel. It's hard to feel 50 yards under pressure. but this is exactly what 50 yards, I've been practicing that. This is my system. I can verbalize it. Boom, you're confident. And that's what's really important, is being confident under pressure. And so what we do is, and I love doing this. And, even if you don't play golf, you could have a great short game, right? So you might not be a scratch golfer, but you can always probably get a pretty good short game. So I would do this with my players, even if I wasn't a scratch golfer. And that is, I would drop 2 balls. And the idea is you put, like, let's say, a basket, and you play for points, or you tell them you got to do this with your friend. And, you hit it from 10 yards and then 20 yards and 30, who's closer, and then you ask them about the system. I remember Bob Rotella has worked with, he's the most famous golf psychologist of all time. And sometimes I would work with players after him, and I'd always say, what was Bob like? And they would say, oh, Bob's okay player, but he's got a great short game. And that was so impressive to them. And I'd always ask them, what did Bob work on with you? So the reason why I bring this up is if you interact with a player, if they've worked with a coach or another sports psychologist or mental game coach, ask them what did they do? And so you can kind of see what they did with that player. One thing I learned from Bob Rotella is one of his main kind of concepts was, you're an athlete. Let's bring out your athleticism. And I think that was really cool. And I try to do that too. You're an athlete, bring out your athleticism. And so I just wanted to, I kind of went a little bit on a tangent there, but I think anybody can be good at the short game. Help your players develop a system gets them confident, their short game gets better, their scores get better, they're happier with you, right? Another thing relates to practice is one animal, competition is a different animal. The farther those animals are apart, the less your game transfers. The closer those animals are, practice and competition, the greater your game transfers. So how do we get those animals closer? Well, in practice, you got to put pressure on yourself, because that's what the golf course, it's all about pressure. So when you're on the range, you got to make sure, you tell your players, after you practiced, for 10 minutes, create a fairway that's really tight and see if you can hit 10 out of 10 in that fairway. The idea is you're putting a lot of pressure. Or they're on the putting green. I know Phil Mickelson does this. He puts 50, he tries to make 50 balls in a row from 3 feet, whatever. And the idea is at the 48th, he, puts a lot of pressure on him, because you got to start all over if you miss one. But the idea is that when you put pressure on yourself, the game transfers. And then in competition, to get that over more to like practice, is stuff we talked about last week, which is, relax more, be in the moment, and it takes away the pressure. And so your animals get closer and closer, and then your game transfers. So that's the ultimate goal, is to get the game to transfer. So I call it pressurizing your practice. The more pressure you can put on practice, the greater your game will transfer. So let me just stop here, and I see. Tyler says, what strategies have you found to be successful at enhancing a player's competitive mindset, since the literature is heavily swayed basically, Tyler is saying what the research has always said: mastering mindset is, the key. Competitive mindset is not, has not been emphasized as much. Well, again, if they're all about mastery, growth mindset, you got to tell them the competitive mindset is the fire. You're not going to practice that hard if you don't have that competitive mindset. It kind of brings that fire to practice. So you need both. It balances both. Give them examples like Tiger Woods and Nick Faldo, or some other examples you can come up with. But the idea is that you got to have both. If you just have a growth mindset, they're not going to achieve at the highest level or achieve their potential. You got to have both. It balances both. And then practice with the shag mentality. So practice with the shag mentality. If you play golf, shagging golf balls means, back in the Hogan days, you would hit balls in the range, and then you'd go and pick them up, or he'd have his caddy. Well, that's actually the best way to practice, because you hit 20 balls and you take a break. And when you take that break, you're processing what you're doing. Most people, when they go to the range, they put down 50 balls and they boom, 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 boom. They don't take any time. So it's way better. I used to practice like this all the time. Is you hit ball. I still do. Yeah, I have a little shag bag and I hit balls in the into the field, and then I go pick them up and I'm processing. It's the best way to practice. I know it's hard to hit a driver and stuff, but at the same time, it's kind of a fun way to do with it. It's a lot easier on the range. I know you just pay and you go. But even if you're on the range, you can do that. You can hit 15 balls, take a break for about 5 minutes, think about what you're doing, get some water, come back. But the idea is when you take these breaks, your processing is much in detail. Let's see if I can. Okay, there we go. Just seeing if there's any other questions. So let me just see if we have any questions. Not yet. So that's called practice with a shag mentality. And again, the idea of practice is you create a deliberate practice. This is what you want to tell your players. A purposeful practice, because your ultimate goal is for your game to transfer. If you're just out there beating balls, you go out there and putt. I tell them when they putt, the main thing we talked about eye dominance the first time. I didn't mention this, but you put a string. You've seen this on 2 screws, and you putt under that string, so it trains your eyes. Your goal when you putt, or I'm sorry, when you practice your putting, should be train your eyes, because feel is pretty, you get the feel, but it's your eyes that are off and your aim's off. That's what most people have trouble with day in, day out. So what I tell my players is, so they come to my golf school, I already had a string with 2 screws and I give it to them, it cost me 50 cents. And I say, we're going to practice under this string, because you got to train your eyes. So I say, I want you to practice under the string, and I put it next to, near the hole. So, it can go, the ball can go in the cup, whatever. We're training our eyes. So do this for 5 minutes and then go out here, putt around these holes, then come back for 5 minutes, putt under the string. And I say, if you do this for about 20 minutes, you're training your eyes. This is purposeful practice. If you just came out here and putted for 10 minutes, you're wasting your time. If you go out to the range and you're just beating balls, you're wasting your time. You got to have a goal. You're doing your short game, create a system. If you're just, hitting from 30 yards and then 50 yards, it's okay. But if you create a system, you're creating deliberate practice, and so therefore your game is going to transfer the competition and the golf course, and you're going to shoot better scores, which is ultimately everyone's goal. So I'm just going to wait here for a second to see if you have any other questions. And let me just say, it doesn't have to relate to what we're talking about tonight. Let's let the gate be wide open, because you could ask me anything, because this is the last night. Maybe it's something I didn't cover that you wanted to focus more on. So anything you want to ask, but it can relate to practice. But I think most mental coaches and coaches don't focus on, creating deliberate practice conditions for their players, but I think that's really important. Asking them how they practice and then creating a practice plan for them is really important. That's ultimately how they're going to get better. So that's why I wanted to really share with you some concepts that are important. So I have a question about rhythm. Do you have a method? I've seen players have a metronome, wear headsets for rhythm, metronome when they're putting. I think all that stuff works. Counting 1 and 2, I think is better. Is kind of more from themselves. So I think with a rhythm, I think counting is good because it creates that internal rhythm. Some people are going to count faster, slower, but I think if you count, you'll find what's comfortable for you, and then you match your rhythm, your swing, your putting stroke to that internal rhythm. So the last thing I want to talk about with practice is, and we mentioned this before, but this is really important, is a lot of the mental game stuff is done at home. So meditation, imagery, visualization, all that stuff, you do it at home, or you have your word and you associate your word with your relaxed state. The idea is you do it at home. The practice is done at home, and you take it to the golf course. You put it into your pre-shower routine. You do it, during between shots, whatever it is. But you got to emphasize that a lot of practice with the mental game is done at home, especially meditation. Once you get good at the relaxation response, you can bring it onto the golf course. But you got to do it at home. And so a lot of the practice is done at home, visualization and all that good stuff. So it's not just, you got to go to the golf course and then tell yourself, okay, be confident or be relaxed or, all that stuff. But the idea is you got to do it at home. And so you get good at it at home, that becomes your habit, and you bring it onto the golf course. So I'll just wait another minute if there's any questions, but I want to thank you for participating. We went over awareness and confidence, anxiety, concentration, motivation, and practice. So those are, to me, the big ones. Again, if I think a lot of you have taken the course, but if you go to masteringgolfpsychology.com, it goes into a lot more detail. I shared with you the code if you want to take it at a really good discount. But again, the idea is if you take that course, you can look at it over and over again and see the videos. I'm going to send you the recording, but it goes into a lot more detail with what I talked about tonight. So one question I have is, I always play better when I walk than I ride. Yeah, because I think it's because you get into rhythm and you're more relaxed in your cart, you're a little tight. So it depends on the person. And someone asked if there's no quiz. I'm going to send you a certificate tomorrow. We already got them pre-made. And so you'll get that. The Mastery Golf Psychology course has a quiz, but I didn't want to do a quiz for the master course. I think a lot of you have taken the course already. I think, you're going to have a recording. Again, I've been doing this for 30 years. So you want to look at the recordings maybe 3 or 4 times. I think there's just so much, there's a lot of stuff in there. And I think it's really going to facilitate your toolbox as a mental game coach, as a coach, as a parent. All this stuff works in anything, parenting, business. It's all the same stuff. It depends how you want to apply it, right? So again, thank you for participating. And definitely it's been a pleasure and an honor.